The United States entered the war in December 1941, at a critical time for the Allies. London and the other major British cities had suffered heavy damage during the Battle of Britain. The German blitzkrieg had extended Nazi control across most of Europe. In North Africa, a mixed German and Italian army was bearing down on the British forces. Many people feared that Germany could not be stopped. At sea, Britain and the United States desperately struggled to control the Atlantic trade routes vital to British survival. Britain relied on shipments of food and supplies from the United States and from its territories overseas. As Allied merchant ships crossed the Atlantic, German U-boats or submarines sailed out from ports in France to attack them. To protect themselves better, Allied ships formed convoys led by American and British warships. The Germans countered with groups of as many as 20 U-boats called wolf packs that carried out coordinated nighttime attacks on the convoys. After the United States entered the war, the U-boats began attacking merchant ships within sight of the American coast. Although Allied warships used underwater sound equipment called sonar to locate and attack the U-boats, the wolf packs experienced great success. In the Atlantic, they sank nearly 175 ships in June of 1942 alone. Allied convoys later developed better defensive strategies, including the use of long-range sub-hunting aircraft, and the U-boat success rate plummeted. By the end of 1942, a sign of bad things to come for the Germans, they had lost 86 U-boats to Allied convoy attacks. In 1943, they lost 242 U-boats to the Allies. In 1944, at the high water mark of the Battle of the Atlantic, they lost 250 U-boats to the Allies. And in 1945, as the war was coming to an end, the Germans lost 120 U-boats in the first 5 months of the year. The battle for the Atlantic had been won, guaranteeing safe shipment of troops and goods to Europe in the fight against the German war machine. Starting in August of 1940, a British army had successfully battled Italian troops in the Egyptian and Libyan deserts of North Africa. Then in February 1941, Hitler sent General Erwin Rommel and a German division to reinforce the Italians. Rommel, who earned the nickname Desert Fox for his shrewd tactics, won several battles. The Germans pushed deep into British-controlled Egypt and threatened the Middle East. Rommel's offensive failed, however, in November of 1942, when the British, under General Bernard Montgomery, won a decisive victory at El Alamein. The German army retreated west. A few days later, Allied troops landed in the French territories of Morocco and Algeria on the northwest coast of North Africa. This largely American force, under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, quickly pushed eastward. Meanwhile, British troops chased Rommel westward from Egypt. In response, Hitler sent some 20,000 combat troops across the Mediterranean from Italy to reinforce Rommel's army in Tunisia. There, in February of 1943, the inexperienced Americans suffered a major defeat of the war while trying to defend the Kasserine Pass. They learned from their defeat, however, and by early May 1943, the Allied armies had the Axis forces in North Africa trapped. Despite Hitler's instructions to fight to the death, about 240 Germans and Italians surrendered. The Middle East had been saved from Axis control, and Tunisia was a perfect jumping-off spot for the invasion of Sicily and then Italy in the months to come. In July 1943, the U.S. 7th Army, under General George S. Patton, invaded the large island of Sicily with British forces. Operation Husky had begun. With the Italian mainland in jeopardy, Italians lost faith in Mussolini's leadership, and King Victor Emmanuel III had him arrested. The Germans, however, freed Mussolini and evacuated him to northern Italy. In September 1943, as Allied troops threatened to overrun the south and take Rome, Italy's new government surrendered. On October 13th, the government declared war on Germany. The Germans, however, set up Mussolini as a puppet ruler of the fascist Italian state in northern Italy and continued to fight in Italy. By November, the Allied advance had stalled in the face of stiffened German defense. The town of Cassino, the key to the German defensive line, stood between the Allies and Rome. In January 1944, the Allies made a surprise move. They landed an American army unit behind German lines on the beach at Anzio, just 35 miles south of Rome. However, the American commander took too long to organize his forces. A German force blocked off the beach in time to trap the Allied troops, and for the next 4 months the Germans fiercely attacked the trapped soldiers. Before the Americans finally broke through the German lines in May of 1944, tens of thousands of American soldiers had been killed or wounded. Meanwhile, the Allies attacked Cassino. They had succeeded in breaking through the German line. They joined with the forces from Anzio and quickly captured Rome. They faced more months of heavy fighting, however, before the Germans in northern Italy finally surrendered in April of 19. That same month, Mussolini was shot and killed by Italians as he tried to flee across the northern Italian border. The corpses of he and his mistress were put on public display and paraded through the streets of Rome. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was not the only leader calling for an invasion of Western Europe. George Marshall, the top American general and FDR's chief of staff, voiced the same opinion. At every Allied strategy conference after the United States entered the war, he pushed for an attack on the German forces occupying France. In late 1943, the British finally agreed to go along with Marshall's proposal. The invasion, codenamed Operation Overlord, would be launched from Great Britain. Marshall chose General Eisenhower to be the supreme commander of the invasion forces. The Allies began a massive military buildup in southern England. Polish, Dutch, Belgian, and French troops joined the American, British, and Canadian forces already in place. In response, the Germans strengthened their defenses along the French coastline, adding machine gun nests, barbed wire fences, land and water mines, and underwater obstructions. They knew an invasion was coming, but they did not know where or when. The Allies took great pains to keep this information secret. Shortly after midnight on June 6, 1944, some 4,600 invasion craft and warships slipped out of their harbors in southern England. As the ships crossed the English Channel, about 1,000 RAF bombers pounded German defenses at Normandy. Meanwhile, some 23,000 airborne British and American soldiers in a daring nighttime maneuver parachuted behind enemy lines. At dawn on D-Day, the day of the invasion of Western Europe began. Allied warships in the Channel began a massive shelling of the coast. Some 1,000 American planes continued the RAF's air bombardment. Then around 150,000 Allied troops and their equipment began to come ashore along 60 miles of the Normandy coast, in the largest landing by sea in history. Thanks to a complex Allied deception, Hitler feared a second larger invasion at the narrowest part of the English Channel near Calais. Nevertheless, the limited German force at Normandy resisted fiercely. At Omaha Beach, the code name for one landing site, the Allies suffered some 2,000 casualties. In spite of the heavy casualties at D-Day, within a week, 500,000 men had come ashore. By late July, the Allied force in France numbered some 2 million troops. Allied troops engaged in intense fighting on the ground. In early August, General Patton used a blitzkrieg to open a hole in the German lines and burst out of Normandy. In Paris, an uprising started by the French resistance freed the city from German control. On August 25, 1944, a French division of the U.S. First Army officially liberated Paris. British and Canadian forces freed Brussels and Antwerp in Belgium a few days later. In mid-September, a combined Allied force attacked the Germans occupying the Netherlands. The American soldiers crossed the western border of Germany. With their war effort crumbling, the Nazis fought desperately to defend their conquest. In mid-December 1944, Germany launched a counterattack in Belgium and Luxembourg. The German attack smashed into the U.S. First Army and pushed it back, forming a bulge in the Allied line. The resulting clash came to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. In just a few weeks, the First and Third Armies, under the overall direction of General Omar Bradley, knocked the Germans back and restarted the Allied drive into Germany. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest battle in Western Europe during World War II, and the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army. It involved some 600,000 GIs, of whom about 80,000 were killed, wounded, or captured. German losses totaled about 100,000. After this battle, most Nazi leaders recognized that the war was lost.